From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Kristen Amiot. It's Friday, March 7, 2025. Cyclone Alfred is slowing down, but meteorologists are warning there could be a rebound when the Category 2 storm reaches the mainland in the early hours of Saturday morning. Experts say Alfred could regather strength and smash Brisbane, the Gold Coast and parts of northern New South Wales with dangerous rain and flash flooding. And The Australian's chief political correspondent, Jeff Chambers, says the storm is eroding the Prime Minister's hopes of calling an April 12 election. You can read his analysis right now at theaustralian.com.au. The Western Australian branch of the Liberal Party have unveiled their official costings, just 48 hours before voters go to the polls in a state election. They're attempting to make up ground following an historic defeat 4 years ago. In today's episode, we get the lay of the land in WA and unpack why the federal government is watching the results of Saturday's vote so closely. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Western Australia became the envy of the world, thanks to unmatched geographical isolation, which protected it from the brunt of the virus.
Western Australia's borders are likely to remain shut until next year. The WA Premier is planning to keep the closed sign up beyond the vaccination targets.
In early 2020, as nations in Europe, Asia and the Americas scrambled to stop the spread, Western Australia eliminated community transmission of the coronavirus, a feat it mostly maintained until December of the following year. As a result, the state's economy thrived. The jobs market boomed, construction took off, and retail trade surged. In the midst of it all, Western Australian voters returned the State Labor Party to government in the most decisive win in Australian electoral history.
Ladies and gentlemen, I take great honour in introducing the Premier of Western Australia, Mark McGowan.
There aren't many people who want to return to the COVID era, but it's a victory Mark McGowan's successor, Premier Roger Cook, is hoping to replicate when West Australians go to the polls on Saturday.
For Roger Cook and for the Labor government in Western Australia, that really was the glory days.
Paul Garvey is a senior reporter in the Australian's Western Australia Bureau.
That's when the borders came down and their popularity went right up. It delivered them that spectacular 2021 election win, delivered Labor this unprecedented hold over both houses of Parliament. And I think Roger Cook was really trying to appeal to those memories that Western Australians have of being kept safe in that era, of Western Australia getting the attention and the respect that West Australians believe they deserve from a national perspective. And also just reminding business leaders that the state's mining industry had continued undisrupted through that period, that the rivers of gold from that industry had continued to flow. And so really it was about just prompting the audience to not forget just who delivered those glory days through that period and kept West Australians safe. And it really has set the state up financially for a very strong few years since.
Ironically, Roger Cook was the health minister when the pandemic first struck, but stood down from the role following a series of health system bungles. But that little hiccup doesn't appear to have hurt Cook's popularity as Premier.
I think we can say with certainty that Roger Cook won't be joining those ranks of Labor leaders who have lost their seats, lost their governments in the past few years. He's been very mindful from a long way out about this trend, not so much against Labor, but a trend against incumbents that's been seen around Australia and around the world. He's been drilling that into his ministers and his colleagues that there is this trend in place and that they shouldn't be taking anything for granted with this election. That said, all the polling we've seen shows that Roger Cook can expect to be pretty comfortably re-elected on Saturday. There will be some seats lost, there's no doubt about that. But Roger Cook can certainly look forward to being returned comfortably come Saturday night.
The 2021 state election was historic for the Western Australian Liberal Party too, but in the bad way.
Opposition leader Zac Kirkup lost his marginal electorate, becoming the first WA major party leader to lose their own seat in 88 years. Labor is predicted to win 53 of the state's 59 lower house seats, giving Mr McGowan a supermajority.
Paul, what went so wrong for the WA Liberals at the last state election in 2021?
Look, there were a few things. The big one was what we were talking about before, right? It was that COVID success of Western Australia. But the Liberals certainly hadn't helped themselves. They're a party that has been dogged by a lot of infighting, a lot of leadership uncertainty, and that has continued in opposition. It's also been marred by just this sense that the party has these dominating, controlling behind-the-scenes figures, usually from the religious right, very socially conservative people pushing views that they hold strongly and genuinely, but which are perhaps at the fringe of what a lot of middle Australians would necessarily believe. And that has led the party to be tarred as one that's controlled by religious conservatives who are out of step with the general public. And so that's really hurt the party standing for some time. It's still an issue that the party's dealing with today. And it's been interesting because we're talking about the shift politically going on around the world and around Australia. People inside the Liberal Party here feel like there's not a whole lot of votes to be won by fighting a culture war, right? For all that Trump may have done on that regard, the Liberals are certainly in a difficult phase of trying to find the right balance there, knowing that a lot of their support base and a lot of their actual MPs may be interested in those issues, but that they really need to try to focus on the middle and run a disciplined campaign focused on those things like health, like law and order, like the cost of living and housing, which we've heard so much about during this campaign.
Look, our candidates are working hard. The community is engaged. We have a mountain to climb. We don't have the resources of the Labor government, of course. While they're playing a game of distraction, we're focused on the issues that Western Australians are talking to us about.
Yeah, we've heard that Roger Cook wants to return to that kind of prosperity of the pandemic. What's the pitch of WA Liberal Party leader Libby Mettam to voters?
The big one of those four for Libby Mettam has been health. She's been the shadow health spokeswoman for this last period of opposition. So she's at her most comfortable when she's pushing on that. And that's quite convenient for the Liberal Party too, because health is one of those areas where for all West Australia's success, most West Australians feel like their health system isn't functioning as well as it should be. People can see and feel the wealth in this state, yet they're not seeing that translate into their health system. So Roger Cook himself, a former health minister, has tried to pass the blame on this to the federal government, but really most West Australians feel as though the state government could be doing a lot more around health, that our hospitals could be in much better shape, and Libby Mettam and the Liberals have really quite effectively made the most of that.
Data from Newspoll suggests the Libs could pick up 10 seats at Saturday's election. It's not enough to get them back into government, far from it, but it's an improvement, and it may go some of the way to getting them back into the public's good graces.
It's been interesting talking to people out in the streets over this campaign. You're not seeing a sense that there's a mood for a change of government, but you do hear a lot of people saying, we just want to make sure there's a proper opposition. I think people here recognise that a democratic system is not set up to be a one-party state. Regardless of your political persuasion, there's a need to have a well-organised and effective team on the other side, pushing back on ideas, scrutinising policy and making sure that the outcomes are where they need to be.
So where do they need to be?
This election isn't really about who's going to actually win, who's going to be the next premier. That's been set in stone really since 2021 effectively. So really what we've all been trying to figure out is what does a good result look like for the Liberals. The people I talk to inside the party have been throwing around 10 as the magic number. That looks like a decent day at the office for the Liberals. That would give them that injection of new talent to build something around going forward. And Newspoll certainly says that they'll get to that point, but not much further beyond it. Where that becomes really interesting is around the future leadership of the Liberal Party beyond this Saturday. It could end up being a very good day for Basil Zemplis, even though Roger Cook will be the next Premier. Basil will get himself elected. There'll be some decent talent coming in to join him, and there won't be such a result that Libby can demand or expect to be the one to take the reins for the next 4 years as well.
Coming up, why the federal government shouldn't put all its eggs in the West Australian basket. It's long been speculated that Prime Minister Anthony Albanese would wait until after Western Australia votes to call a federal election. It's easy to see why. The party's state branch is a shoo-in for a third consecutive term, and WA was vital in delivering Labor to government in 2022. But whatever goodwill Roger Cook and his colleagues have garnered since then isn't necessarily felt towards the feds.
Well, there are warning signs this morning for the Prime Minister in the West. The latest news poll shows voters who turned to Labor 3 years ago are already in the mood for change. They didn't take long at all.
Here's Paul Garvey.
It's been interesting that we have now been through this entire campaign and we haven't had a single visit here from the Prime Minister, but there'd be more than a few people inside the Labor Party who wouldn't be losing any sleep over that happening, because the Prime Minister's got very much a mixed standing here in the West. That said, when we're looking ahead at the next election here, it's questionable as to whether we will actually see a whole bunch of seats come back to the Libs. But that's one of the things we're watching for on Saturday night as well, is what can we draw from the seat-by-seat results? What does that tell us about the way people are viewing the Labor brand more broadly inside those key federal seats?
Okay, Paul, this is looking like a pretty sure thing for the West Australian Labor Party, but are there any battleground seats in this election, and where are they?
Yeah, there's going to be some really interesting ones to watch. West Australia is quite different from every other state in that there isn't a formal coalition between the Liberals and the Nationals, so you do have some genuine three-cornered races here. So seats like in the regions like Kalgoorlie, which has been held, I think the last 4 elections it's been Liberals, Labor, Independent and Nats have all had a go at holding that seat. And so the way that one falls on Saturday really is anyone's guess. We're waiting to see the anointment of Basil Zemplis as a member of the Liberal Party. He's considered basically a shoo-in to win his seat of Churchlands. One that will be very interesting to watch is another regional seat of Albany. Albany is a seat that's been hit very hard by the federal government's live sheep export ban. That's really hurt the Labor brand. And the state government more broadly has a pretty mixed to poor standing in the regions generally. The health issues that are pretty poor in the city are even more acute in the regions. The state government's bans around things like native logging, the fishing industry, reforms around gun laws and so on have all proved deeply unpopular in the region. If there was going to be one surprise on Saturday night, I'd be thinking it could come in the regions.
Paul Garvey is a senior reporter in the Australian's Western Australia Bureau. You can keep up with his reporting and analysis of this weekend's state election at theaustralian.com.au.